Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming today. My name is Satsy. These are my friends. And today we are going to be talking about F.R.O.S.T. I promise you it's going to be a cool panel because F.R.O.S.T stands for Flexible Round Optimized Schnorr Threshold Signatures. But that's, yeah, go F.R.O.S.T. But that's all I'm going to tell you about because our panelists are far more qualified to talk about it than I am. So let's jump into introductions, starting with you, Jervis.
Hi, my name's Jervis. I work at Block on the Key wallet. Yeah.
My name's Jesse. I work with Jervis on Bitkey, and I'm also working on an open source F.R.O.S.T implementation in the SecP ZKP repo.
I'm Jonas. I work in the Blockstream research group. I've been working on a protocol related to F.R.O.S.T for a couple of years that is called multisig. I co-authored the paper as well as the implementation.
Hey, I'm Armin. I've been working on Bitcoin self-custody and privacy, actually with Jervis and Stacy for the past half decade. And for the last year, I've been working on sidechains where we've been using F.R.O.S.T. Thanks.
Great, awesome. So we got to start with what F.R.O.S.T is. And when I first learned about it, there's a lot of cryptography involved. And the one person who was able to teach me about it was Jervis right here. So can you do us a solid and share with the audience what F.R.O.S.T is and what some of the pros and cons are when you're comparing it to something like the script-based multisig that we all know, but not all of us love?
All right. I guess when I first introduced you to it was a couple years ago, so I'm going to try again. Might have gotten worse over time. So F.R.O.S.T is basically a paper written by Chelsea Comlow, and it is basically a way of constructing Schnorr signatures distributively, and also being able to get a bunch of participants to come together to construct a bunch of key shares without ever having construct a key in the first place. And the combination of that allows you to enroll like a bunch of signers that would be able to come together to create a Schnorr signature to spend Bitcoin transactions that appear just like any Taproot transaction on-chain. And so as a consequence of that, what that means is contrary to pre-existing models of multisig, meaning the ones that use object multisig, that means that when you spend from your wallet as I don't know, a 2 or 3, a 3 or 5 or whatever, everything shows up on-chain just as a regular Taproot transaction. So there are a bunch of benefits, and it's not just about privacy on-chain and not revealing all the public keys on-chain or key arrangement on-chain, but also, as it turns out, a lot of practical benefits. For example, say you are a collaborative custodial customer, and you have a 2 of 3, and that's the app, the server, and a hardware wallet. Say today with a pre-existing model, if you lose a hardware wallet, effectively you would have to go purchase a new hardware wallet and then like sweep everything into and to reestablish the 2 of 3 quorum. And that specific user event, if you will, incurs not just a monetary cost that comes with needing to pay fees to sweep your entire wallet, and depending on the amount of outputs you have, it could cost quite a lot. And on top of that, there's also a bit of a privacy loss, right? Because you kind of make yourself susceptible to sort of transaction linking, because you're really just gathering all your outputs and be like, hey, look, this is me. And so F.R.O.S.T kind of lends itself well to leveraging extension protocols like proactive secret sharing, where it kind of takes care of that in a sense where you move a lot of these rotations and repairs off-chain. So none of that will require going on-chain, and as a result, like no fees, et cetera, et cetera. So was that helpful?
Thank you for that. So F.R.O.S.T can be divided into two parts, with the first being something called distributed key generation, or you'll see it a lot as DKG, which we're going to talk about more. Armin, can you tell us a little bit about DKG? And you're using F.R.O.S.T right now, so can you tell us what it's been like to implement that?
Yeah, Jervis kind of covered DKG a little bit. So this is distributed key generation. And the goal of DKG is to generate secret shares and an aggregate public key for our threshold multisig in a verifiable, and it's in the name, distributed way. And I think the best way to explain DKG is to understand the alternative, which is a trusted dealer setup. So this is where a single authority will generate the secret shares for each peer and distribute them in a secure and authenticated way. But the clear drawback with this is that the key has to be constructed in memory at one place. So if you have an application that has high security requirements, this might not be a very attractive property of your protocol. But if you don't, it's actually quite nice, because then you don't have to play an interactive protocol. So that brings me on to DKG, which has a really neat property where each peer can generate their own secret share and the aggregate public key without the key ever being present in memory fully. But it also has some drawbacks. So I mentioned this interactive protocol. So DKG is a 2-round asynchronous protocol, and it has drawbacks. You have to deal with the edge cases. What if a peer disappears halfway through maybe round 2? How do you restart this thing? Maybe you need to discard shares of a previous session in some verifiable way. It also has kind of a gnarly and novel property for most applications called agreement. So this is where peers need to, so Alice and Bob will have to agree that they receive the same protocol messages from Carol. And if they don't, they can end up with different aggregate public keys, and money can be gone. So that's a little bit about DKG, and maybe I'll stop right there and ask if the other panelists want to add anything.
Yeah, I would like to add something. So we've been working on a BIP draft for a distributed key generation protocol. The problem that it solves is that you can implement it without knowing much about cryptography or having to read the paper. If you want to implement F.R.O.S.T right now, you can look up on the internet. There is a F.R.O.S.T RFC standardized by the IETF. And in the abstract, they make it clear that they don't specify a distributed key generation protocol. They only specify the trusted dealer mode. Okay, if you don't want to have the trusted dealer mode, there are good reasons for not to have this trusted dealer, because the dealer might be compromised or not able to delete secret shares. You want to implement a distributed key generation algorithm, which means that you need to read the F.R.O.S.T paper and understand what they are saying there, how to build this protocol. And the way they describe it in the paper is that they make some assumptions about the reader, namely that the reader has some background in cryptography. So they say the secret shares must be sent over a secure channel to the other participants. I guess most people in the room will understand what that means. Okay, secure channel means this is a channel that allows you to send encrypted messages and it's authenticated. The other primitive they need to use in order to build this DKG in the F.R.O.S.T paper is a broadcast channel. And a broadcast channel is often misunderstood what it is. At least if you give it to an engineer will think that a broadcast channel just means that you send messages to everyone. But that's not what a cryptographic broadcast channel is. And so you need, when reading the F.R.O.S.T paper and wanting to implement that, you need to understand that. And the advantage of chill DKG is that essentially it does all that thinking for you. We call it's a standalone implementation, so it doesn't refer to these external primitives like secure channels or the broadcast channel. It deals with the edge cases that you mentioned. and it has a couple of additional features that are useful for a DKG. For example, it has some relatively novel approach to backups. It works with an untrusted coordinator, and yeah, things like that.
Nice, thank you for that. Yeah, check out Chill DKG when you have a moment. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the second part of Frost, which is the signing. So I have an easy question for you, Jesse, and a hard one. The first one is just please describe how the signing process works. And then the follow-up to that is that given that Frost typically will have multiple participants, is there anything interesting that we can do with privacy? Like, do all signers need to see everything that is being signed?
Yeah, so the way signing works is it's built on a Schnorr signature, and a Schnorr signature is kind of a remarkably beautiful and simple signature construction. So it is a linear equation. The primary part is, you can describe it as R plus CX. And so R is a random nonce, X is the private key, and C is this thing called the challenge hash. And the challenge hash takes the public key, the message, and a commitment to the nonce. And so it's just these three components, R and CX. And what's cool about this is, let's say you had a participant generate a Schnorr signature with their nonce and their private key, but they use the same challenge hash as another participant, and participant B does the same thing. When you add these two equations together, the R's will sum together, so you get R1 plus R2, and the CX plus, or CX1 plus CX2, you factor out the C, and so you get this, like, the sum of the nonces plus the challenge hash times the sum of the private keys. So they aggregate really nicely. And so, and this is very similar to what we see in multisig. How we sign in Frost uses very similar properties, where we're gonna add these signatures together, the nonces are gonna combine, the private key shares are going to combine, and it's just gonna form into a standard Schnorr signature. Now, to do that, the participants have to exchange these nonce commitments in advance, because they have to sum their nonce commitments as an input into the challenge hash. So they exchange these nonce commitments, and they do their signatures with their private key shares, and then they add the partial signatures together, or some aggregator does, and boom, you have a valid Schnorr signature. One thing we do differently in Frost than multisig is, because these are Shamir shares, we need to add a Lagrange coefficient, because we're doing Lagrangian interpolation. A simple way of thinking about this is, like, if you have a line, if you have 2 points, there's only one line that goes through those 2 points. And if you are given the 2 points, you can use Lagrangian interpolation to get back to the line. And so without going into too much detail, we have to do this interpolation, and by just simply multiplying the private keys by a Lagrange coefficient, you add everything together, you get a valid Schnorr signature. Now, on the privacy question, there's some interesting properties of Frost that lend themselves to having some privacy with where some signers may not know the transaction details. So imagine a collaborative custodian setup where you have a client and you have a server, and they each have a Frost key share, but the client doesn't want the server to know their entire financial life, how much Bitcoin they have, the transactions they're sending, what Bitcoin they're receiving. They want to blind the collaborative custodian from knowing those details. One interesting thing is, when we use BIP32 tweaking with Frost, the tweak can be added by the aggregator. So the server needs to have the tweaked key in their challenge hash, but they don't actually have to add the tweak to their private key. They can just perform their partial signature without the tweak, and then they can send it to the aggregator, and the aggregator adds the tweak at the end. So that gives us one building block where we can have the wallet owner is solely responsible for the chain code and never tells the server what the chain code is, never tells the server what their key tweaks are. And so yeah, the server knows like the root Frost public key, but they can't find any of the child keys without the chain code or any tweaks to derive child keys, which means they can't derive any addresses, which means they can't find any transactions on the blockchain with respect to the chain code. Now you still have this problem that the server could recognize its own signature on the blockchain. And also it has to figure out how to compute the challenge hash and the nonce hash. There's a paper that was published earlier this year called Concurrently Secure Blind Signatures. And there's this primitive called a Schnorr blind signature where basically a signer can get a blinded message and return a blinded signature, and then the requester can unblind it, and the signer can't recognize their own signature and it doesn't really know what they signed. This paper adds a cool idea, which is a predicate blind signer, which is if the signer, you can also attach a zero-knowledge proof to the blinded signature such that the signer can verify any arbitrary predicates. So the signer might need to enforce certain signer policies, maybe for compliance or maybe for security. Maybe they're going to enforce time delays or whatever it is whatever signing policies they need to enforce, they can do so by virtue of this zero-knowledge proof. So basically the signer knows the signing policy is passed. They don't learn anything else about the transaction. Now this requires additional work because the paper that we have is not built for Frost or any kind of multi-party construction. But my team is actively working on adapting that protocol to work with F.R.O.S.T so we can have this really nice collaborative custodial privacy.
Wow, that's really cool. So predicate blind signing for anyone that wants to look into it more, which is super new. Okay, so I've got a bunch of questions for everyone now, so feel free to jump in. The first one is I want to start talking about some of these bells and whistles that we get with F.R.O.S.T. Are there any that you all think are particularly interesting, ones that can maybe change the overall user experience, not just for multisig in the context of self-custody, but for applications outside of that use case?
I can take this one. So Jervis alluded to this earlier. So one cool thing about F.R.O.S.T shares is they're Shamir shares. And there's a whole line of academic research that deals with cool things we can do with Shamir shares under these domains of proactive secret sharing and dynamic secret sharing. So one of the things that you can do with F.R.O.S.T is you can rotate your key shares without changing the secret. So like Jervis was saying, we don't need to move funds on chain, incur fees, or link UTXOs together in a single transaction. And there are protocols for adding and removing participants also without having to move funds, and even moving the threshold around, increasing and decreasing the threshold without having to move funds. So now, imagine like a setup where you have like a 2 of 2 F.R.O.S.T wallet between a phone and a server, and then later you decide you want to add a hardware wallet, or maybe you want to add a tablet, or maybe you want to add a laptop. And you have this really flexible setup that you can change around, but you're not having to incur transaction fees to make these configuration changes. So that can be really useful. And this is kind of, this stuff, we don't have all the formalization and security proofs that we'd like, so I'm kind of getting into some more theoretical areas that still require more work to get done. But as long as we're kind of wildly speculating, another interesting, cool thing you can do with F.R.O.S.T is nesting Frost in multisig. So this can be interesting in the Lightning context, where you have a Lightning channel that consists of a 2-of-2 multisig between the channel counterparties. But what if somebody wants to have distributed security for their key that they use to sign channel updates, rather than just treating Lightning as this kind of hot wallet that you only want to put like some spending cash in, but nothing beyond that? We could kind of ramp up the security potentially by having one of those two or either of those two multisig public keys that is used to instantiate the channel could be a Frost public key, an output from a Frost DKG, meaning that either of those Lightning counterparties could have a 2-of-3 under the hood or any arbitrary T of N split for their side under the hood, because we're nesting a Frost key or 2 Frost keys inside the multisig setup. And there's a bunch of issues with getting consensus around the channel update and dealing with the revocation key, and is the nesting even secure at all, and so on and so forth. But there is this theoretical possibility that I think is pretty exciting.
So I want to touch on the first thing you said, these first set of bells and whistles, creating a dynamic multisig. It's really useful in self-custody, but it's even more useful in off-chain protocols, particularly side chains. So in side chains, we have this one problem of we want to make the federation dynamic. So for those of you who don't know how side chains work, there's usually a multisig. You deposit your Bitcoin onto this multisig and get minted some side chain equivalent of Bitcoin to some address. And what we like to do is to expand this federation and to also reduce it. If someone lost their key in the federation, we like to replace that person. So traditionally how sidechains do this is either 2 ways. One way is really bad, which is to maintain different wallets with different signatories. This starts to get really complicated because there's no bound to the number of wallets here. What if you need to spend a bunch of UTXOs across all these wallets? Now you need to track these signatories, and it can get really messy. The other way is to slowly sweep the UTXOs onto the newer wallet that now has the updated multisig, which just costs a lot. F.R.O.S.T is really nice here, because now we get to dynamically change the federation and we don't need to do any on-chain activity.
I have maybe a bit more conservative view on this, because I would make, at least today, state of today, a rather big distinction between F.R.O.S.T and the bells and whistles, because for F.R.O.S.T we have multiple papers that prove its security in different ways. We have a relatively easy security model which defines what exactly we want to achieve. We want to achieve a threshold signature scheme. Whereas the bells and whistles, I agree, the applications are really cool, but we don't really have a good security proofs or even definitions what these bells and whistles actually are, what we want to achieve and what we can achieve. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, there exist papers in the literature that solve parts of this grand unified bells and whistle theory of F.R.O.S.T. They only solve a part of it, and only in relatively restricted models. So for example, they assume that the adversary is semi-honest, whatever that means. Or they say that your threshold in this T of N setting must be below a certain number, which is a big restriction on how people usually think about F.R.O.S.T, because they assume that there is some honest majority in your group of F.R.O.S.T signer. And this is why I think, at least right now, there is this distinction, but that doesn't mean that maybe tomorrow or maybe it already happened yesterday or the day before, someone came out with a complete specification of what we want to have, including all the security proofs, etc., that you just need to implement, and then everything is fine.
Yeah, and one thing is that, so there are separate protocols for all these different things. There's a refresh protocol, which is completely different than the enrollment protocol, which is completely different than threshold increase, threshold decrease, and they all have different schemes and different levels of proofs and modeling and assumptions. And then we have these other schemes that try to combine them all into one kind of grand secret resharing thing, where you just have a single protocol that can do all the stuff. And that has other assumptions and limitations, and some of them work with they work with bivariate polynomials and not univariate polynomials. So we have to think about, can we adapt them, and some of them. So I think some of these are on a little bit more solid ground than the others. And there are also, some of them we have good proofs with the passive adversary model, but not the active adversary model. But we think there's some pretty straightforward ways to at least work with the refresh protocol and the repair protocol. And so that is our current focus. But we're working towards kind of getting all the bells and whistles that we would like. And we do think that there's a path towards that, and we just need to continue doing the work to figure that out.
All right, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jonas. I think it's important. Like, it's easy to get excited about it, and I'm very optimistic, but we do have to keep ourselves in check a little bit. Next question is, so you guys have convinced me that F.R.O.S.T is cool. I want to shift it now to how can we get F.R.O.S.T into the hands of users? Like, what are some things that developers need to be aware about when they're trying to bring F.R.O.S.T into their projects?
So how can you use F.R.O.S.T today? There's a number of different libraries. Jesse has his own library. I'll let you pitch that. I've been using and testing and supporting the Zcash Foundation's F.R.O.S.T library, which is also written by the F.R.O.S.T authors. When at Botanics Lab, when we were looking at implementing F.R.O.S.T, we were looking at really a unified interface for both DKG and signing. We didn't want to do these in two separate libraries. We don't want to duct tape a solution together. And Zcash is really, the Zcash F.R.O.S.T library is a really good solution to that. The only problem was it didn't support Taproot signatures. So over the last couple months, we've been working with the community to add Taproot support. If you don't know, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Taproot. The signature scheme is slightly different, uses X-only public keys, and tweaking is a little bit complicated. Jesse mentioned the BIP32 tweaking. We also needed support for additional tweaking. So this is, you kind of think of this as like a nested operation of tweaking, and at the end is your Taproot tweak. So all that stuff, we've been working with the maintainers of this library to add that in, and we're almost there. It's going to be included in the next release, so check that out.
Yeah, I want to mention, we started this discussion by splitting F.R.O.S.T into these two parts, key generation and signing, and there exist two BIPs, draft BIPs right now in the Bitcoin space. One for key generation, that's the chill DKG BIP that I mentioned, and then one for signing, which is written by Sif2R. A shout out to him, he cannot be here today due to visa issues, he should be here instead of me. And so these are draft BIPs right now. So what would help would be if people would look at these BIPs, see if they understand them, and try to implement them. Both of these BIPs have reference implementations written in Python. Both of the BIPs should be almost complete. The chill DKG BIP is missing one feature that we're currently working on, and it's missing test vectors. I believe the signing BIP has test vectors. So one next step to move this forward is to work on these BIPs. Then there are also implementations, right? You mentioned the Zcash implementation. Jesse has an implementation for the trusted dealer mode mainly. That needs more review. It's written in C. So I think if people want to review that, then help would be appreciated as well. What I would also like to mention is that F.R.O.S.T signing, except for the Lagrange coefficient that Jesse mentioned, is very similar to music signing, and music does not have a key generation phase really, or at least it's much simpler than the F.R.O.S.T one. So one natural step, if you think, okay, maybe I should use F.R.O.S.T in my product one day, is to take this intermediate step and use music today, because for that we have, I believe, much better implementations, much more mature, and also mature BIPs. And you can also do threshold signing with music by using the Taproot tree. So you can do a T of N also with music, using music and the Taproot tree. So this would be like one way to move towards this ideal future where multisig wallets are actually indistinguishable from normal payments.
Yeah, I think I wanted to sort of like highlight sort of the significance of chill DKG as a BIP, because as Jonas mentioned, if you read the base protocol paper, it kind of, it does not prescribe a lot of things, things like secure and authenticated channel. And so developers are just kind of like left to go figure out what that means. Zcash has a great piece of documentation on how they're doing it. But even that has a bunch of like nuances to it over like the adversary model that Jonas also did a bunch of work with, I believe Tim Ruffing, and sort of like teasing out a little bit more. And what they put together with Jill TKG is really this complete thing that has all of what you need prescribed and kind of takes care of a lot of kind of very hairy potential, like, you know, vulnerabilities, if you will, in a DKG implementation. In fact, when we looked at DKG, that's pretty much what we rooted a lot of our initial explorations around. Just kind of like taking a look at chill DKG. It also kind of, I believe, the OLAF paper, which was sort of like came before chill DKG, kind of simplified some of the communication rounds required. It took it down from sort of like 2 down to 1, and so yeah, I think the chill DKG BIP is going to be pretty significant for moving F.R.O.S.T forward for the community. So definitely go look at that.
And by the way, if anybody's interested in seeing what this might actually look like in a self-custody wallet, the BitKey team just posted a blog post and a white paper. You can check it out at bitkey.build. And we have a design for a 2 of 2 wallet with this upgrade path to the 2 of 3 with some of the privacy stuff we've talked about, some detail about how we implemented secure channels. So that should kind of help give a better understanding of what this is actually going to look like in a fully embodied form, and the features and the kind of benefits that we're going to be able to deliver with the technology.
Alrighty, so we've got one more question, and then we actually might have time for questions if anyone in the audience has any. So before we close it out, what are some cool projects that are currently using F.R.O.S.T or working on getting it into production? I think we know the answer to that. But like also, are anything that hasn't been mentioned that we F.R.O.S.T-ophiles should be watching? Or did we just talk about all of that? Well, you can plug Botanics.
Yeah, check out Botanics. We use F.R.O.S.T and we're really cool. Yeah, we'll save you fees and we'll protect the privacy of the Federation. And also check out BitKey. These guys are awesome.
Sorry. So Jesse mentioned we published something, and obviously this is us kind of like putting our best foot forward with kind of reviewing pre-existing literature to try to apply, try to get to a user experience we want to deliver to our customers. And we're also seeking feedback. So if this is completely wrong, and if Jonas is gonna open a paper and complete dash our dreams, it's perfectly okay. Like that's part of the exercise. Like it's so yeah, that's what we kind of ask from the community as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of exciting things already, like the blind cosigner, multisig lightning, where you can split up your key into a F.R.O.S.T. I think that's all super cool. Multisig wallets, like Core, for example, or Bitcoin Core. There's a PR to Bitcoin Core for music, so it's not completely out of the question to assume that one day there will also be a pull request for F.R.O.S.T. At Blockstream, part of the motivation for this research is for federated sidechains, or like these large multisigs, because in Liquid in particular, the spending policy is an 11 of 15, and we have a lot of UTXOs, and it's actually quite expensive to spend these UTXOs. So it would be much cheaper if it was like just a single public key and just a single Schnorr signature.
Also, you can do silent payments with F.R.O.S.T. If you look at the silent payments BIP, there's like a little footnote about that. So that's another cool application.
And Froster, right? Frost on Noster, Nick Farrow's project? Yeah, the hardware side. Yeah. So you can do it there too. Alrighty, I think that's it. So we've heard it over and over again, but you have 3 pieces of homework now. Thanks for coming. Number 1, check out the Chill DKG BIP. Number 2, check out the F.R.O.S.T. signing BIP. And then number 3, check out BitKey's new paper. Do we have any questions?
Questions from the audience?
Do you envision any way that F.R.O.S.T. could be used as like a coin join alternative to get privacy again with transactions?
I think those are pretty discrepant ideas. Like usually when you do your coin join, you don't want to give up access to your coins. You will register your inputs and your desired outputs in this privacy-preserving way, but you don't give up access to your coins. That would be a really bad property of a coin join protocol. So yeah, I really see those as 2 completely separate ideas. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you.
Less of a question, just one more project that anybody interested might be want to go check out. So Mr. Cool Guy of the Fediment project did a F.R.O.S.T. and then a R.O.S.T. signing module implemented for the Fediment system that does Nostr notes. I think it was inspired by the Froster that Nick Farrow did. So if you're interested in seeing how a Fediment model is structured, but then also how F.R.O.S.T. and Roaster was implemented in that was another project to go check out. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you could talk at all about some of the issues in the original F.R.O.S.T. paper. Oh, yeah. Some of the issues in the original F.R.O.S.T. paper that.
Just to clarify, why?
Because I know that there was changes to musig and related, and actually I can ask later if it's.
I mean, it's a good question. It's true, the original F.R.O.S.T. paper had 2 issues. First of all, there was no proof of knowledge of the public keys, which resulted in a key, what we in the Bitcoin space typically call a key cancellation attack, where you choose your public key to be the negative of someone else's public key, and when you sum them up, then that some other person isn't there anymore because the sum is 0. So you can cancel someone else out. The other problem was that F.R.O.S.T, the original F.R.O.S.T, they proposed a 2-round scheme, but they did not do the, how do we call it, nonce delinearization technique using nonce coefficients and nonce hashes that we use today for F.R.O.S.T and today for music. So it didn't work in the concurrent model, and that was not in the concurrent setting, and that was not pointed out in the original F.R.O.S.T paper, so you could say that was vulnerable, but it was fixed, I think, like 6 months later. People pointed it out relatively quickly. The version that was published in a in a conference journal, that one didn't have security issues as far as I know. But it shows that proposing these cryptographic protocols and even having a security proof for it, the original version of F.R.O.S.T also had a security proof, does not imply necessarily that it's actually secure. So their proof actually has this, what they call heuristic step. So there's actually a missing step in the proof, and that still exists today, and therefore there exist the follow-up papers, for example, the Olaf paper that Jervis mentioned, that also provides a proof and then shows maybe more convincingly that that F.R.O.S.T is secure.
In that case, let's give a big round of applause for this fantastic panel.